5 1 2 2 8 2 0 2 4 3 2 5 7
The amateurs talking at the same time as you're trying to get your transmissions out from Crystal Palace and things, it just really wasn't going to work. So I'm just trying to find my date here. Around about 1949 the UK lost 5 metres altogether. So we had no VHF allocation at all. The higher up the bands or lower, that was it. We had up to 10 metres. The States, they were quite happy. They were messing around with 6 metres, having great fun, making longer distance records across the States and what have you. Mostly CW and a little bit of AM, of course, but there was no sideband back then. So we were kind of a bit stuck without 6 metres, which is where 4 metres comes in. We'll talk about 4 later on. So we, kept going on like this, and slowly with the demise of low band TV in the UK, we went a bit higher up in the UHF sort of range. I'm not fully knowledgeable about TV. Into the early 80s, we start looking at the RSGB starts of saying, can we have an allocation here? And eventually in 1986, that was the momentous year when we finally got an allocation in a 6 metre band, which I'll be a bit more in a moment. So apologies in the slides, from the Shortwave magazine in May 1947, these are some of the old 5 metre first contacts between the UK and various countries. The dates there. France was back in February 36, there's a couple pre-war, and 56 megs, and I suppose some of these might be moving up to 58, up to 47, and then of course by 49 we'd lost it again. Just looking at the dates and the months, there's a couple of anomalies, but is there any sort of correlation? Is there anything anyone can see in the months, the years? Yeah. Sorry? Sporadic, yeah, they're mostly spring and summer dates, which will sort of pop up again a bit later on. So that's quite interesting to note. Lovely slides, they're my notes, look an absolute shambles, but it just gives me... Okay, so back to 6 metres in the UK. 1980, the RSGB had been working with various bodies, I suppose the European IAR here is it as well, European-wide, trying to encourage 6 metres across Europe. The TV was moving into higher frequencies, so certainly in Western Europe we're starting to find space. The RSG proposed that we have an allocation there to match it with DOS. And the Home Office actually supported it, and we're talking to the relevant people, but the BBC objected at the time. I don't think we had much in the way of TV still down there, but there was 1 or 2 round about, maybe some lower power transmitters, and so the plan was abandoned at that point. But by this point there's quite a groundswell of support for wanting this allocation. We did have 4 metres, but at this point we're pretty much the only people on 4, which we'll talk about again later. So then in 1982 the UK 6 metre group was formed. That's another sort of body to get people together to try and campaign on behalf of 6 metres. A bit later in 1982, have I got dates? No, I haven't, but there was rumours that the governing body at the time was going to say, yes, you can have an allocation for some experimental fees, but it was going to be strictly limited to just a few amateurs. And there was around about 300 amateurs, full Class A licences applying for these permits. At the same time in 82 there was the first 6 metre beacon, I'll go into beacons again a bit later, which was licensed in the UK. Then we go into 1983, and out of those 300 applications we were allowed 46 special permits to operate in the band. I'm just seeing if I've got... There's nothing about power on there, but it was severely limited, and it was outside of TV hours. Bearing in mind that this is back in the days that we'd all be nodding off over your pint of beer, or I'd be in bed because I shouldn't be, at that age, shouldn't have been watching TV, but there was the national anthem and it all closed down. So if you're thinking about the sun ionising the atmosphere and with sporadic, it really wasn't much
you're not really going to be likely to work the States in the summer overnight, unlikely. So it wasn't much use. But there you go. 1984 it was relaxed a bit more. They issued another 60 permits, and now we've got about 100 or so people messing around in the band. And it starts to cause a little bit of confusion. And I did hear one anecdote which I read, I think in the 6 and 4 book, which I'll show at the end. There was a Golf Juliet 3 station. Is that Golf Juliet? Is that Jersey? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who was calling it a Whiskey 5 station, so over in the States. And I'm not going to try an American accent, but this Whiskey 5 point blank refused to talk to this Golf Juliet because he'd never heard of a Golf Juliet call sign. It must be a pirate. Because they weren't used to, on 6 at that point, hearing anything outside the States and just assumed, therefore, it was just someone as a bit of a wind-up. How things change now. There you are. So, 1st of February 1986, the momentous day when all Class A licences could finally gain access to 6-metre band in the UK. There were a few restrictions. You weren't allowed your full 400 watts as the A licence. It was 100 watts on SSB, and apparently only 25 watts on CW. And the maximum height for the antenna of 20 metres. But, you know, we know 100 watts is a reasonable amount of power. It's not the kilowatts that the Americans use. And you're on there. And then finally in June 87, the Class B licence holders join in, pretty much at the same restrictions. And eventually, over the years, we've now gone up to the full 400 watts, isn't it, at the Class A licence, and, well, the full licence now, and the intermediate and the foundation licence at their 50 and 10 watts respectively. Pretty much, I think there's a couple of minor variations. And so that's kind of where we are. It's not totally focused. So just again, yeah, we've now got the 400 watts, the intermediate and the foundation licence. And we've got from 50 dead to 52 megahertz. And we're primary in the first and then secondary. You know, there's quite often centres, you know, there's quite large areas of the band where we can go and play, but there's usually little clusters around specific frequencies for international DX, calling or intercontinental. There's a couple listed there. I know I used to quite often listen on anywhere between 110 and 150 when I was first licensed. Had a whole 10 watts to play with on 6. And I'll go on about the antenna in a bit, but it worked quite well. There we are. So there's just a bit more in here. There's a bit of a mention of propagation beacons. And the beacon just gives out a CW ident. I'm not quite sure how often they do. It's not, you know, it's every few minutes, isn't it? You hear it and every 15 minutes maybe, something like that. And it's just good if you're not sure what propagation is doing. One of the ways is just to, if you've got a beam, you can point roughly in the direction, you know, if it's in the south of France, aim it south or whatever. And, you know, when you start picking up the beacons, you can think, hang on, propagation's improving or whatever, and it might be time to go and have a listen around and put some CW calls out. As we all know, on 2 meters, if you don't put a call out, you're never going to get a reply, and we all then sit there listening, moaning that there's no activity. It might be every 2 minutes. I think they're a bit more than 15. I think the 15's... yeah, thank you. But I'm not totally knowledgeable about the beacons, and I'm afraid I've had to sort of rush to get some of it together. And then between 5100 and 5500 is purely just narrowband modes. So, you know, a bit more CW in the SSB popping in. And there's a bit of mention here, and I'll come back to that. Crossband activity is common, particularly between 50 and 70. If you're looking to cross, you know, if this propagation's open and you want to get across the pond on 70 megs, well, the Americans don't have access to 4 meters 70 megahertz, so they'll come back to you on 6. On 50 megs, so there's there's certainly areas to go to, and mentioned down here there's PSK and various digimodes, meteor scatter going on, and EME, the Earth, Moon, Earth. So basically, Tim just tracking the moon across the sky, bounces signals off the moon to come back somewhere else, which is really gaining in popularity, and particularly you can do it with CW and some of these weak signal modes are very good at that. We can try voice, but I think that the digimodes are the way to, and CW the way to go. Incidentally, there's no one yet done EME on 4 metres. Nothing recorded as that I can find, and certainly not in the books from the last couple of years. So that'd be an area I think where the more allocations coming onto 4, that someone will start to fiddle around with that. And then, you know, it goes right up to 52. There's 6 metres FM comes in. It's quite a nice band to use mobile. The antennas are a bit longer than perhaps you're used to on 2. And I'll mention mobile again before, because 6 and 4 have quite a lot of similarities. There are some differences, but yeah, I've just listed the one. There's various places you can find information on beacons. Really good for listening to if you want to learn about propagation and just start getting a feel for propagation on the HF bands as well as VHF. And just listing there, 50 megahertz dead in Buxton, so it's not particularly far away, so it's not really relevant for us as a list, but the list is as long as your arm. And at this point in the morning, I couldn't remember how to do screenshots, so I couldn't get a nice full list. I've now worked it out. It's been some years since I've done it. Screenshot. So then you can go on to see repeater.net, and these are roughly all the little highlighted points are FM repeaters for 6 metre mobile. Everyone knows how to repeaters work, most people. And if you don't, please feel free to ask afterwards. And just listening, probably the nearest, there's one in Mid Wales, but there's one up in Liverpool, GB3LP. I'm sorry, it's a bit fuzzy, but we're doing the best we can. And then it'll give you the frequency, the input and output frequencies, CTC, SS, etc. And quite a nice thing to use on mobile. And 6 really does travel a longer way. I think, I don't got no real proof for it, but 6 and 4, when you're mobile, just seem to, the signal just seems to travel a little bit better. I mean, it is anecdotal, but we did do, and I'll come on to it before, a few experiments when I was driving to and from work on various bands over the space of 12 months, and it was quite interesting to note what was going on. So the magic of 6, they do call it the magic band. You might have heard that one. Let's check the time. It can, TV broadcasting can find it a nightmare, because you might suddenly, you know, there are 1 or 2 still in Eastern Europe that are still messing around down there, and other bits of the broadcasters use frequencies around for some of their audio, but not so much these days. And they might find that they're quite happy, but then a bit of amateur interference comes in. But magic for the radio amateur. Before I move to this QTH, I'm still trying to get set up here. You quite often have a radio. I haven't got anything amazing on 6. Just monitoring one of the calling frequencies, and it can, you know, the SSB, and it can be dead for weeks, or even into the summer. And all of a sudden, you can get the clusters on your mobile phone, and I've misplaced my list of all the links, so I'll put that up on the website, and it'll tell you there's a bit of activity coming up, and you might, you know, expecting sporadic E, there's forecasts on RSGB News and things. You might just keep it monitoring. And all of a sudden, that dead band you start to hear little bits rasping in and out, or you might have an hour or 40 minutes or 10 minutes where it's suddenly alive, and you can work Europe or you can work the States. And then it's dead again. It's fine for, you know, around the UK or local stuff, but international, intercontinental dead. So that's the magic of 6. 20 metres when the bands are normal and healthy, not like when you've had these stupid flares going off and it's dead this weekend. 20 metres normally, if you're going at the right times of day, you know you're going to make contacts, don't you? You know, you're fairly reliable that you're going to work somebody. 6 is a bit like sitting there with your rod out on the old lake waiting for that carp to come along. You go out and 5 times out of 6 you catch nothing. But so yeah, propagation. I mean, they say that 6 can behave like VHF bands and HF to some degrees. When 6 is really open, you can work. There's pretty much nowhere in the world that won't be within your grasp, even on quite basic antennas. You know, so people quite like playing around with the troposcape, you know, Aurora and Meteor Scatter, which I'm not really going into. And sporadic E, and something called the F2 layer propagation, which I'm going to have a look at and try my best to waffle on about. F2 on let's just go on a bit. If you remember the Earth, there's the different regions of the atmosphere which sort of deplete overnight. So you've got the D layer nearest to the Earth, then the E layer, F1 and F2. F2 being the furthest out. And then if we just think a little bit about your usual radio bits and pieces, particularly on VHF, that's quite a long way out. So you get the ground wave that just works within very short range, which on 2 is when you're mobile or you're just talking to your mates and you can hear it fairly local, but you drive 20 miles down the road and they're gone. And then there's different levels in the atmosphere, and if your signal's going out and there's enough activity going on in the ionosphere, and the sun's been warming it up and the gases in the cloud in the ionosphere is produced, then your signals can bounce back down, and if you're really lucky, they might then have multiple hops and you can get further out. So I know this is 28 megs, it was just the best little diagram I could find. So we all know, I assume most of us know that the sun has like an 11-year cycle. When it gets really active on the sun's surface, and it drops off. When was the last peak? It was about 2 years ago? 2 years ago? And we're now on that steady decline, which means that F2 propagation probably isn't going to happen for a while on 6. But when sunspot activity increases, the F1 and then the F2 layers sort of come into being as the ionosphere sort of gets charged up with the sun, and I'm not very good at explaining the ionosphere, but it becomes very active. And all of a sudden, instead of just bouncing off the E layer, which we're going to talk about sporadic E, which is the most common, the F layer comes in F2, and so it's going a lot further out, and you can take your signals a lot further around the world, which is why, have you ever experienced 6 when it's really open, Stuart, on like the F2 layers? No, I managed a little bit when I was first licensed, and that just, I didn't go to bed one night. Well, one day, and it just kept going on even after dark. It was just one of those, which considering I was using a dipole, just drawing pinned in the attic on 10 watts was, So, during the daytime when the sunspot activity is at a maximum, the F2 layer can become ionized, intensely ionized due to radiation from the sun. So when the sun's really active and it's throwing out a lot of this material, something called the MUF, maximum usable frequency, gets higher. So a lot of people on HF, 10 meters, opens up in the summer. MUF is becoming ionized at F2. The more ionization, the more activity the sun's creating, that MUF, that other bands suddenly come into view. And 6, as I say, that's when it becomes active, like kind of like HF. And some pretty considerable distances of certainly VHF reception. Some of this might be TV reception, but you're talking tens of thousands of miles, or certainly several thousand miles is not uncommon when it's really good. But this is our usual friend in the summer, and this happens on 2 meters as well, doesn't it, on occasion. Sporadic E, one of the lower layers now. We've gone from the Fs back a lot lower down. And again, there's gases there. The sun's making its magic, but instead of being a whole layer around the whole Earth, the sporadic E can quite often just be quite small areas of this ionized gas. So therefore, you might have again another 20 minutes, you could have several hours, depending on the opening, where you're not going to get working the other side of the world, but certainly around Europe and possibly across the pond with it, with multiple hops come into action. Possibly, but certainly into Europe, and that can be equally exciting. From about next month, May, towards the end of May, that will start to pick up, and by the end of August, it's usually on the decline. And strangely enough, around at about the turn of the year, you sometimes get a little spike, but I'm not quite sure why that happens. It's not as pronounced, but you can sometimes have sporadic E. Transceivers have moved on a bit. The Americans, AM, with their the Goonie box, they called it. It was just something I could find. If you weren't home brewing, then you were having to shell out probably quite a lot of money at the time for things like this. Now, mid-80s radio at best. This is a Kenwood 680S, and the only reason I've put this up as an example of this is a HF and 6 meter radio. holds a little place in my heart because that was my first HF set, because it could be turned down to 10 watts, do a maximum of 100. And that's the one that last time, when I was licensed 2001, I can't remember which sunspot cycle, not long after, then we had a little bit of F2 one night, and that thing doesn't have all the filters and bells and whistles. I've never had anything like that, but that was just amazing. And then I think that's the ICOM 7300, which is their latest offering, which also has 4 meters. So where are we up to? Okay, just bear with me. Okay, antennas are pretty much like anything else. You can go the commercial route, or you can go the homebrew route. The commercial route, we all know some of the major antenna producers and the websites, Walters and Stanton, Wallace and Gromit, and all the others that are around. We can make your own, of course. That's a 3-element, what they call it, one of these loop-fed arrays, which, is it G0KSC, Justin Johnson, I think that's his call sign, a company called Innova Antennas, or he actually sells them, but to be fair to him, he also produces free of charge all the details on how to build, so you can go off and build your own to exactly the same spec. I've got the materials currently to make one 3-element and one for 4. I just don't have the wherewithal to make it at the minute, so my dad's a tool maker, so eventually we're going to get together and use his skills to put it together. But then you can even just make a dipole out of a couple of bits of copper tube or aluminium. You can talk from 20 pounds up to hundreds of pounds for an antenna, varying dubious qualities up to really good. Vertical is ideal for local FM, and of course we all know horizontal for the sideband and the CW and other data modes. This here doesn't show up too well, but that's just a half-wave dipole strung in the attic. That isn't mine, but that's all I had when I was working, goodness knows what, on 6 a few years ago. And it will give you on your 10 watts, for those new in the hobby, this summer. You might not work the world, but you will get something, and if you can get it outside on a pole, even as a fishing pole, it'll be great for you. So that kind of is 6. I hope that was sufficient on 6. And then we're going on to 4. Used to be known as the gentlemanly band, not the gentleman's band because that was top band, but it was a very British band. But is it anymore? That's the question we have to sort of think about. Why is it unique? Is it unique? It's still not worldwide. There isn't too much commercial equipment, but anyone who's reading the various bits and pieces will know that's starting to change in the last sort of 4 or 5 years. It's still a great place for people who want to homebrew and build their own kit from scratch, or buy kits and have a go at getting the soldering iron out. Again, I said it's very effective mobile. It's also very cheap if you've got a nice mag mount. It's a bit of welding rod, and that's just a 1/4 wave on 4 that I cut, and that's my mobile for 4. And I can't remember if I talk about mobile again, but when I was living in Shropshire, I was working in Worcester, which was about 35-40 mile run the route I had to take, and up and down through hills. And I got various friends in Shropshire, and then some in Bromsgrove, which is my old hometown. I used to, amateurs, and I used to try and talk to them as much as I could, particularly the Bromsgrove lot. And we'd try it on 2, and there were patches where you're on higher ground, and 2 would work very nicely. And there's also repeater networks to help you out, and you could probably cover 75% of the route and keep talking. So we just decided over this case that 12 months we tried it on 6 meters with a 1/4 wave on the car. Yes, you could probably have better antennas, but just cut like that cheap. And we did it on 4 meters, and the 4 meter coverage was probably about 95% of the route. Yes, it wasn't fully quietening, and you had to drop the squelch then or whatever, but that's just a bit of anecdotal stuff on my route. But it was just quite interesting just to try the different, between sort of 50 megs and 144. We didn't try 77s, we thought that would just be a little bit of a stretch too far through the geography of the South Shropshire. Maybe that was just my preconceived ideas about 70, and I should have tried it, but yeah, it was quite fun to have a go.
Excuse me, I've got a couple.
Yes, nice to see you, Matt.
See you.
Okay. So, a little bit of 4. We're getting some mega cycles now, because that's what it was back in those days. It wasn't megahertz, it was in cycles. Same thing, of course. We've already mentioned the demise of 5 metres. And finally, after lots of lobbying, that was 49. 7 years later, 1956, we gained 4 metres from 7,200 to 7,400 megacycles. And then the first QSO on 4 metres. Where have I got to? I lost it. Oh, there we are. G5KW and G8KW. Does anyone recognise those call signs by any means? If I said that G8 Kilo Whiskey was a chap called Rowley Shears? No one into vintage 60s kit. KW Electronics from Dartford, who made the KW1000 series, who one of the first commercial SSB HF transceivers in the country, was a company filmed pretty much between those two. And they were also big into their VHF at this point. And then from the 70s, well, probably much earlier, there's 1 or 2 other countries had a little dalliance with it, but there was very limited access. You can see United Kingdom and its other, crown dependencies round and about, and Southern Ireland, Gibraltar, Cyprus, and South Africa, strangely enough. And that was it. So the opportunity to really try out the DX capabilities of the band was somewhat limited, which is why we all wanted to get on 6 metres. We'd have been quite happy without 6 if everyone would come and join us on 4, I think. But that's kind of where we were. Right, but then we were talking magic banding, and we're back to 6. This is something from June 2007. I was trying to find an example of a crossband QSO. I'll need the in a moment. And we're going back to where I've lost it now. Has it lost half of that? In this opening in June 2007, there was a Victor Echo 9 station. Had a crossband, he was on 50 megs, had a crossband QSO on CW with G7 CNF, which is, just bear with me, see if we can find the relevant bit. The audio in this is pretty ropey at the best of times, and it's very raspy CW, so we'll just have a little blast of it just to see if we can prove that he can just about hear the other station. Can anyone hear that at all? Sorry? Oh, hang on. So that's our friend transmitting. Can we just about make out a reply in there from the Victor Echo? Apologies about the hum, and this apparently is with the audio cleaned up on this clip, so I think we can probably stop. But this was a confirmed, with cards for DXCC, this was actually a confirmed.
Turn the bass down.
Thank you. It goes on and on a little bit, but it was more just, I wanted not just for me to waffle, I wanted to try and find, that's via sporadic E, crossband between the two, which...
That guy, the AA,
Yeah.
takes part in the contest. I take part in CW Ops actually.
Yeah.
And he normally operates mobile from a Mini Cooper.
Oh, right, okay. Mini Cooper. Okay, nice to see you. You may have noticed that both the transceivers, it wasn't very clear, both the transceivers there, the one they were transmitting on, the one they were receiving, both read at 50 megahertz. That's because they were using something called a transverter, which I'll touch on in a minute. I'm sorry I couldn't blow it up any bigger particularly easily. As of March this year, middle of March this year, these are the sort of countries around, mostly around Europe, that have some access to 4 between 70 and 7500. But what you might notice is it's not particularly harmonised. Where's the UK gone? Is it not on there? Might not be on there actually. But we've got access between 70 and 7500, so the whole of this spectrum, whereas an awful lot of others have got little slices of access here and there and everywhere to avoid, I suppose, other service users in that area. I didn't mention that we only have 4 on a secondary basis. We still officially share it with the military in this country. And on the full license, the full license in this country, we're not allowed 400 watts. It's at 160. Just make it a bit more of an even playing field in contests. You haven't got some big gun running huge amounts of power and then someone else on flea power. And then a few more. Germany still have a slight allocation, but these are other people that have had, other countries that have had some allocation in the past, but they've lost because quite often it's just for temporary, for experimentation for a summer. But their licensing authorities still, government authorities still don't see fit to give them permanent access. Although at the latest IARU conference, was it, they had another one recently, which was looking at...
There's an element of use it or lose it.
Yes, that's right.
If you don't get a good lot of people on there, then you don't get to keep it.
Yeah. So actually, before I move on, we have had in this country, just before Christmas, the announcement that from 7,500 up to 71 megs, so the top end, a bit more of 4, was a slice for the full license holders to apply for an NOV, to do some of the digital work and things like Danny and Peter have been, the reduced bandwidth TV and things, which is great. Except I've also noticed that Ofcom have now put that slice from 7,500 up to 71 as the place they're going to use for the Internet of Things.
We'll have rather more power than that.
Yes. But it's just interesting that you've got to use these spaces, otherwise they think that we won't need them, don't want them. And this is particularly happening at microwave bands where we've got more space to play and experiment than all the HF bands and all the VHF, UHF put together, but very few people using it. And it's a case of, as you say, Chris, use it or lose it. So that's just another way of, I like pictures, I'm a geographer, so maps are always quite nice. Current allocated countries around Europe. Countries that have had a recent allocation, Italy's, I think, is still out at the moment. This is, I think, middle of last year, this one. And the French authorities are considering an allocation once again. And then looking over here, look, there's 1 or 2 licensed operators who've just been given special permits. There's 3 little dots. Just happening over there in Sweden? Yeah. Denmark was one of those anyway. I'm a geographer, but I'm a human geographer, I might add. So the situation in Europe has changed a lot, and all of a sudden this is why this band is starting to pick up some interest, because there are countries out there. The FCC, the government organisation that looks after the radio spectrum in the States, has recently, as last year, turned down another request from the Amateur Radio Relay League to have any access to 4, apart from I think there's 1 or 2 propagation beacons over on the East Coast. But that, I'm sure, at some point, once they finally drag their television into the 21st century, will change. I'm sorry, it's a little bit small. Just looks at the 70 megs band plan, 4 metre band plan for the UK, with beacons between 70 and 7050, which I use before a contest, especially if I'm out. I'll listen to GB3 ANG, I think it is, which is up in the middle of Scotland somewhere. I haven't the details with me. And if you can pick that up within the 20 minutes to an hour before the contest, it might be worth putting a few Q calls up that way before you start beaming elsewhere, because if the propagation drops out, the poor chap who's volunteered to join the contest in Scotland might be a bit peeved that he's not making contacts, and you might have missed out on a nice multiplier that gives you lots of extra points in the contest. And similarly, there's beacons around Cornwall, and there's quite a few around the UK, so that's not so many in Europe yet, but it is growing. And then, of course, we've got the narrowbands modes and CW, and what you will notice is that there's still 7260. It's now listed as an AM and an FM calling frequency. There are still some users, particularly around the Bristol area, that use AM. And 7260 was just an easily available crystal for some ex-military kit just after the war. So they'd call on that frequency, they'd have their QSO, and everyone would just join in, and that's kind of why that's still there. 7450 is the FM calling really these days, and everything in between. So it's, it's plenty of space. It's not a huge band, but there's enough room to mess around and enjoy yourself. Hello, John. Propagation on 4, we won't go through modes too much again. It's similar to 6 metres, but the F2 propagation, this one that there isn't huge allocations all around the world, but it's never been noticed, particularly on 4 meters. So it won't act quite in the same way as 6 on the slightly lower down the spectrum. But once again, sporadic E is king. It's great for local natters, but sporadic E is king, and you can have some quite enjoyable contacts around and about Europe. But you do get this fading, this QSB, and it's, you can get it on all bands, but on 4, it's always been particularly noted. It's very, very deep, and can, you know, signals at rest 9 can literally drop right out, even on shorter range contacts at times. I don't mean, you know, within range of the FM stick when you're driving between your mates, but just a bit further out. So particularly in contesting, there aren't hundreds of them, you know, or thousands like there might be in some lower contests. So if you've got that harbour contact and you think, oh, I've been trying this for 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes, especially towards the end when you know you've worked all the obvious stuff, it's worth hanging on that beam heading, and all of a sudden I've popped back up and I'd be more than pleased to finish that QSO. Because I know when I first tried it on 4, I used to just move on, and I was losing points for myself, because it really is a, yeah. I've got another couple of brief bits just to prove that 4 does work on a... We will be finished before 9:30 as well, you'll be pleased to hear. So, it's really good. Right, thank you for that. Okay, the next video, which we'll try and get somewhere, was a QSO single sideband with the Echo Alpha 1 station, somewhere in southwest Spain, I believe, and GW8 IZR. Is that a fairly local call? I mean, I don't know the chap, so this was... yeah, and it goes on a few minutes, but I want to play it because I want you to hear the amount of output power that the Spanish station is using to make the contact, which goes to prove my thing about sporadic E in the summer. You might be using a brilliant beam, but the power out. He's using a...
Golf Whiskey A, Italy Tulu Radio. Golf Whiskey A, Italy Tulu Radio. Is Echo Alpha 1, Golf America Romeo, over.
Yeah, Echo Alpha 1, Golf Alpha Romeo. Golf Whiskey 8 to Italy Zulu Radio. You're 5 at 9:59. Italy Oscar 73 Tango Italy. Italy Oscar 73 Tango Italy.
Okay, very good copy. Thank you very much. After we carry Oscar 73 Tango Italy. My locator is India November 51 November Whiskey. India November 51 November Whiskey, and your channel report is your 5 by 9 plus 10. 5 by 9 plus 10. QSL.
Just hang on a minute. So.
Golf Whiskey 8, Italy Tulu Radio, Echo Alpha 1, Golf America Romeo, over.
You can see the fading on him as well. It's
Okay, your report is your 5 by 9 this moment, and TSB also PSL. Okay, Paul, thank you very much. My name is Victor, and my power is this moment only transmit to 500 milliwatts, 500 milliwatts.
less than a watt.
Power. Thank you very much, Paul, 73, and all the best.
Yeah, there'll be another one in just a second. But yeah, 500 milliwatts. He might be using a fab beam, but you may have noticed CB equipment. And that Allen 87 multi-mode CB radio, which can obviously run somewhere around about the 10 metre mark, using a transverter to put him on the bands. So my point being, when I do a little bit on transverters in a minute, is that it can be quite an affordable band to get into, because some of the new kit that's got 4 metres in costs hundreds of pounds. Transverter might cost you, it can cost you 400, 500 quid for a transverter, or you can cost you less than 100 depending on where you look. It might not be such good quality, but it will get you on the band, and you can have some great fun. If you've got a 10 metre radio, most all HF radios have got it, you can get on the band fairly easily, and you can make antennas out of all sorts for 2 or 3 elements, can't you? So that was interesting. That's SSB, sporadic E again. I didn't write the date down, but these were both, I did look at the time on these are from YouTube. They were both summertime sort of bits and pieces. And another brief little bit, if I can find the relevant piece. Bear with me. 2 minutes 45 on one.
48 hours of every the year. And 15 degrees, this is not summer. Ciao, Barry, thank you for your talk. Code 0, Fox Hotel Mike.
Thank you for that. Might not seem totally significant, but that was FM contact. The Juliet November is somewhere down towards Venice. The Italy Whiskey Victor Whiskey Kilo, and he's G0 FHM Juliet 0 square is. Is he? No, J0 is 02. He's over on that sort of easterly. Yeah, Norfolk way. But that Ascom radio was using pushes around about 20-25 watts, and that would just be into a collinear or some sort of homebrew vertical. Yeah, it could be Cambridge way. So all I'm trying to get across is that with not huge amounts of power, even not so common on FM, but it can be quite fun sometimes just making these contacts on FM. And if you've ever been driving in the car and listening to Radio 4, Radio 2, or whatever, Mon FM or whatever it is, Mon FM, and all, which I do occasionally tune in. And all of a sudden, I can remember listening to Radio 2 last year, and all of a sudden, it's been swamped by something in Spanish. So I turned the car around and got home pretty damn smartish and found that the higher bands were absolutely dead. But sometimes it's a good indicator that it might be worth getting home and getting into the shack. So we're looking a little bit about some of the equipment. Just after the war, a lot of people started on things like this. I think it was a Larkspur or something like that, and the B44s and things. AM, pretty much a crystal frequency, but they could be made to sort of go a few cycles either side, so you could try and move away. Not a huge amount of power. Or you were doing homebrew, particularly on CW. When I started out, 10, 12 years ago, whatever it is now, we were looking at peer market, particularly stuff that the Water Board and other people in Fire Brigade and other people, various things have been using. The ASCOM series, which was in that last clip, and then these FM 1000 and 1200 series, which a chap in the Netherlands very helpfully to reprogram the EEPROM to use. And there were an awful lot of them still out there. You used to be able to get them and get the EEPROMs and do it for about a £5. I now find on eBay that they're probably going for about £70-80 because that huge rush has gone through now. So they're still easily obtainable, but not quite so cheap. But still cheaper than going out and buying a commercial radio. And I've worked across bits of Europe into France and odds and ends on those when conditions are right, and that's the thing. I'm battering around in the car when I was experimenting driving to work. Only downside is you need an external speaker and all these bits, so you've got extra bits and pieces to consider. But mine costs, I think, about 10 or 15 quid, you know.
29.
Yeah.
Astral.
Yeah.
20 quid.
Yeah, and there's others around as well. Some of them are rock bound. There's one of two chaps at Telford had about 3 frequencies you could move. So if we had the net, we had to remember that we could only QSY to certain frequencies. So the one day when I went up to 475 and found I was the only one there, you know, then I had to go back and they were all still waiting on 500 saying you'd forgotten, hadn't you? So we had to move the other way. Around about 20 or 25 watts out at the most, but you know, 15, 20 watts is more than enough. Single sideband. Certainly going back quite a while now, 60s when single sideband was coming out, there was no commercial radios available. So you'd be looking at a transverter. which mixes using a crystal controlled oscillator at a certain frequency. Someone who could explain these better than I'm sure, but for instance, we take 28 megahertz, you mix it with this fixed oscillator, and then it will create transmit and receive. You can do the up and down converting there. So for instance, my 28200, which I read out of my HF transceiver that I use for it, my old Kenwood, actually is 7200, which sounds blooming obvious, but a couple of times I've looked at it and thought, where the hell am I? But it's very simple stuff, and it works very well. This is the one I've got. There's various different models, but a Spectrum Communications one.
That's what I've got as well.
Is it, Kev? Yeah, they're all right, aren't they? I mean, there are some more expensive ones, which you'll see on a couple of pictures in a minute, which have better noise floors and, and a bit more sensitive. But those are a couple of £100 to buy now.
Yeah, I know.
I'll talk up price in a minute. They're enough. There are cheaper ones out there. They're not the cheapest. They're not the Lada. No. But they're not the Rolls Royce. They're somewhere. They're the Ford Cortina that's dependable, or the Ford Sierra, whatever it happens to be at the time, dependable. You can get low drive ones, low power, and this one, mine's got the PA mod element in as well, the low pass filters, and gives about 20.
6 watts drain, about 30 out.
Yeah, or if that's got an attenuator in to take the 5 or 6 watts. My old radio, because the finals are blown, it's just giving out milliwatts, and I'm still getting the full 24, 25 watts out on it. Which you can quite happily go out and play off a leisure battery, and it's not going to worry you at all. So yeah, just used to convert from HF to VHF. Or you can, there are some you see that use, instead of using 10 meters, can use 2 meters, so 144 megahertz, so 144 dead becomes your 70 megs dead. But if you think about it, when I was doing that at the previous club, the transverter we used before on VHF field day was working off 28 megahertz. Why wouldn't we want to work off 144 megs if you're doing like a VHF contest with multiple stations? Any thoughts?
Station next door.
Yeah, the station next door, which was one of our best point scorers, was a 2 meter station, usually running at the full legal limit of 400 watts. So if you've got something, if you're using a little 2 meter radio in a 10 to 15 meters away to try and get your 4 meter station on a Sunday, you've got no chance. So we always pick the HF option, which is usually the most popular one. There's a few currently available. We've mentioned that beastie there. Is it Kuna? It's K-U-N-H-E Electronics, a German company. That is currently, that's around about 25, 30 watts out, maybe a touch more. Same job as that. Yeah. Much better noise figures and bits and pieces, but you're looking, I think this is built. This beastie is around about 210 as a kit, or around about £281 built. I had the kit version, a friend of mine put it together, and I learnt a lot about construction, and I'm still rubbish with the soldering iron, but I learnt a lot about the principle. This beastie is around about 1,139 as of today. There's a Hungarian one. This is supposedly one of the best of the lot. I couldn't find a price on the internet. The ME4T, which is, I think, is it Hotel Alpha 1 Yankee Alpha. It's his company. I know I haven't had a nice picture of it all fitted together. Coming from the Ukraine, you see them on eBay. And the January Practical Wireless had a write-up on this. You can get it with a very low level output, but they also do a 15 or 20 watt PA to go with it, low pass filters. And the whole box kit is around about $130 US. So there's your Lada basic end of things, but I'm thinking about getting one for 6 just to try messing around with next year. I've got access to 6 on my little tiny 706, but I'd like to run it through maybe my FT102, which has got better bits and bobs. But that's your basic end, those your top end, and that's somewhere in the middle, which is why a lot of people go, certainly in the UK, go there, and it works very nicely. And just we like looking, amateurs do like looking at the odd little picture of kit they can't afford, don't they? This is some of the kit. Certainly has SSB capability and usually FM and all the other bits. The first radio really to have it in this country, 20 years old now, the FT847, yep. The Yaesu. Just 100 watts on HF and bits and pieces. It was a lot lower output on 4, and it was known to have a pretty depth receiver. Yeah. There are some mods you can get done to it, and it can make a reasonable job of it and get about. Yeah, but it's not as good as. I come with the next main company, still the only other main company that are really doing it. The IC7100, which came out a couple of years ago. The IC7300 have both got 4 metre capability, around about 50 watts out. And a startup company in the Netherlands called Noble Radio. It's the only radio they do. I've seen one in the flesh. It looks rather like some MFJ equipment in terms of the style and build. The NR4SC. It's purely SSB and CW 4 metre radio. Simple single conversion radio, but apparently works very nicely. Do splits and bits and pieces. Did I actually get a price on that as well? It was something ridiculous. Went about £600 delivered. That's the next one up from that now. It's got 15 watts out instead of 10, and there's a few of the mods. Yeah, exactly. These beasties, yeah, I wouldn't pay it for a single band radio on a band that isn't the liveliest at all times. And you're talking around about £1,000 for that currently, and around about £1,050, but you get deals, don't you? Hence why most people currently stick for SSB with transverters. Almost done, chaps. FM equipment. Looks hideous now. A company called Garex, now Spectrum Communications, channelized 4 metres. Little Rooks and handheld, around about 90 quid now, purely for. The antenna on the top's useless, but you can get some much better ones, and it works very well. I've heard a lot of SOTA stations use it. And this little Rookson, of which KG-UV950PL, what a mouthful. Quad bands, 6, 4, 2 and 77s. 50 watts out on the 3 VHF bands. But that's around about 250 quid now. So, delivered. Martin Lynch had it specially made with 4 as opposed to 10 metres in. Because the others do 10, 6, 2 and 70. But it's a proper one with the full guarantee through them. It's not something you've got to send back to China, even though it's built there. That's what I've got, because my whale rather, decided to buy me one last year. And finally, now I forget the name of the company, has just come out with a vertical stick that I can put on the house that covers all 4 bands, as opposed to having to do duplexes or whatever else and run various antennas. So, you know, that's about 170 odd quid. I wouldn't pay for it. But that was one of the first commercially available FM. Linear amplifiers, bit of Pi equipment there, A200s, slight variations, but you can get about 50 watts out with a little tweak on 4. Or then you're looking at the places like the Linear Amp company, that's a UK company, that's solid state, 300 watts out on those two, but again, it's 850 quid. So you've got to be quite keen to spend the money. Dutch RF shop sell all the bits, including various relays and bits you can add to it to make a 150 watt bits, including the power supplies you can add on to that. But that's around about €60 for the basics. So that's what I'm looking to do in time. Do some 4 metre contesting this year at about 25 watts, but we're looking to build on with that. You know, it is achievable. I've been having some quite detailed conversations with them. But then if you want to go out portable with a little handheld on a hill, a simple slim jib antenna made out of 450 ohm ladder feed, just hooked onto the top of your fishing pole up in the air and connected to your rig. Even if it is rubbishy old RG58 for 2 or 3 metres, isn't going to hurt too much, but because if you start putting 213 on a fishing pole, it's going to be, of course you want the lowest loss really, and RG58 isn't good at the higher frequencies, but cost effective and lots of fun. Not quite sure how we ended up on there. Contesting, there's plenty of contests on 6 and 4, and there's more approaching on 4. There's always, you know, the Made field days, but even in the last week there's been 2 4 metre contests. There was one of the backpackers of Sunday activity contests yesterday. You get the monthly UKACs, don't you? The UK activity contest on a Tuesday night that run for a couple of hours. 4 only happens about 3 or 4 times a year, because it runs on the 5th Tuesday of the month, and there aren't many 5th Tuesdays of the month, which is a bit of a shame. It's a shame they can't double up on another thing. And it's quite useful to know your, without getting into Maidenhead locators now, know your locator, because you'll need it. You heard them exchange them earlier on. And it's there. Where are we? So there's one last little clip if I can, and then we're practically done. Because I know we all need a cup of tea, I know I do. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's this one. Nice homebrew linear. Don't know where they are. Come on. I just want to see the antenna. It's only a 4-element beam. It's up on a fairly lightweight rotatable pole. And that was a Practical Wireless contest this last September. Done in the south somewhere. That's enough of that one.
Mike 0 Tango Alpha Zulu portable.
Will the other station stand by, please? M0 TAZ. Portable, T3ME8, 59010, 509 number 10, IO91.
We don't need to go on. We know what a contest exchange sounds like, but the 4-metre contest exchange, it's not like a HF one where it's bang bang. It's a very, it can be quite a leisurely affair. I'm never quite sure why that is, because there's some very serious contesters out there. I think it comes down with the QSB, and they also know that if you're too quick with it, quite often it's missed. So if you just take your time and maybe repeat it, but it might not be, Stuart, how you like to do it, but it's a different band, and it has a different sort of feel to it. I think I've got 3 more.
Told off for in a 6-metre trophy contest when it was wide open with a Sprite key.
You took too long, did you?
And the pilot was coming in and I was repeating. I said, don't need to find a repeat. This was Steve there.
There's,
It sounded just like 20 metres.
yeah, it's I think contesting, like anything else, it's all a matter of opinions, isn't it? If you take too long on them, especially when it opens with spreader key, people aren't going to hang around long enough to work you. They'll go and find someone else because they could work possibly 3 while you're. But particularly that Practical Wireless contest, you might only have 60 or 70 stations on over 3 or 4 hours, so you've got the time, and some of them even ask you if you're having a nice day. Those I can do without, and then I'll go back round to them if they're calling CQ, or you speak to them after the contest has finished for a minute. And there was an Echo India that was, well, I didn't actually put the score in the end, but I was just messing around when I did it last September, because it wasn't the best takeoff in many ways, certainly into east of UK. But it was an Echo India that was the only Echo India on in the contest, and it was very strong, 30 plus all the way through. And he kept trying to come back to me mid-contest to ask, I only made a dozen or so contests, but I was listening and trying to, I'm calling CQ and listening for something, because there was something I could hear. It was a Juliet Oscar square, but you just couldn't hear me. But I kept trying at different times when, it was a little bit lift. He kept coming on, how are you getting on then? You just wanted to, yeah. So I QSY'd a different frequency, and bless him, he must have been getting bored himself, because he kept finding me at that point. Anyway, just beacon list, we talked about beacons. There's Buxton, 7100, but there's Dundee, there's Petersburg, Northern Ireland, Blandford Forum, Tring and Hearts. It goes on and on. And there's more and more beacons coming on all the time. Who's a pretty boy then? Last slide before I say any other questions, I can have a cup of tea. It's a bit of an odd one. Parrot repeaters. There aren't many repeaters on the 4-metre band. That's my last video is Parrot repeater, just to show how tedious they can be. Whereas on a normal repeater, you've got the input frequency and the output frequency. You talk, it's just relaying it. 4 being quite a narrow band. The Ofcom still aren't keen to license any others at the minute. I'm listening out for when they relax it a bit, see if we can get something up here, just messing around with. But it's a single frequency. You transmit, it records it, up to about a minute usually. Any more than that, QSO would take forever. You drop the mic, hear a little beep, pip or something normally, and then it repeats your message. Then you've got to wait for them to record their message back in, and then it comes back to you. So to exchange a couple of bits can take an absolute age. We had one of these just outside of Ludlow, and it was rarely ever used because most of us from that neck of the woods that were on 4 found we could do it simplex. And it was a bit, dropping in and out a little bit. That was easier than trying to use the ruddy box. And just to pass on simple things like, can you put the kettle on? I'll be up at yours in 5 minutes. Oh, and switch the laptop on because we're doing this. Could take 15 minutes, at which time you've arrived, or it would have been easy to pull over and phone them. So simplex was the way. So there's one last little bit of video, if you don't mind, and then we're done. And the idea of putting video was just to demonstrate and just to get away from me talking bits as well, which was right. Video 5. He's the most annoying voice.
EKF, yeah? I'm going to demonstrate to you how the MB
Right.
were originally.
Right, hang on, I'm just trying to find roughly.
As you can see, FM 1000, here my rig, and
Right.
Holland as well when they did the 4 metre band.
Anyway,
I'll demonstrate, you talk and then it repeats. So
he's a bit of an annoying twit, but it's the only demonstration.
30 EKF, listening MB7 FM. There you go. You know how I might get the reply back.
But you don't know if you've got a reply because you've got to wait for them to record their message.
I'll do it one more time. 2 Echo 0 Echo Kilowatt Foxtrot.
He's using a transverter again on FM.
2 Echo 0 Echo Kilowatt Foxtrot listening MB7 FM.
There you go. And that's how MB7 FM works. Go to EKF here. I'm going to demonstrate to you how the
That'll do. He does have a QSO, but it goes on forever. But could you imagine trying to have any kind of meaningful... If you're like me, you'd have forgotten what you were talking about by the time they come back to you. So, no. So if anyone's ever had... Has anyone else ever used a Parrot? Yeah. It would time out, wouldn't it, before we'd even finished? That was in Tring in Hertfordshire, MB7 FM. There's only a few around. Yeah. You can see why the RSG, Ofcom aren't particularly keen to license any others. So thank you for listening. I don't know if anyone's got any questions. And if not, see me afterwards or let me have a cup of tea before I expire. But thanks for your attention, guys, and I appreciate it.